Welcome to the deep dive. I'm genuinely excited about what we're digging into today because it really challenged how I think about something we all encounter, art. Specifically how we see it, especially when it feels like, it's speaking a completely different language, or maybe even judging you from across the museum floor. Our source for this deep dive is a powerful summary of John Berger's truly um, game-changing work, Ways of Seeing. Berger was this incredibly influential English art critic, novelist, painter too, who just sort of ripped up the traditional rulebook of art criticism. His 1972 BBC documentary and his Booker Prize-winning novel, G, they really cemented his unique, often quite provocative perspective.
Yeah, what's so compelling about Berger, particularly in Ways of Seeing, is how it offers such a sharp contrast to, well, mainstream art analysis. While most traditional critics often get lost in the brushstrokes and color palettes.
Technical stuff.
Exactly. Berger forces us to look beyond the surface. He pushes us to consider the historical currents swirling around an artwork, the artist's real intent, and even the often hidden agendas behind how we're told to interpret art.
So if you've ever felt that kind of disconnect from classic art, like it's some secret code you haven't quite cracked, Berger gives us the tools to decode it. We're going to pull back the curtain on his insights today by exploring three core ideas. First, how artworks can become almost deliberately obscure or mystified.
Right.
Second, the profound and sometimes surprising influence of mechanical reproduction. Hello, camera.
Big one.
And finally, how all of this has created a pretty significant gap between art and, well, the everyday public. All right, let's jump straight in then. Berger argues that the sort of grand, distant reverence we often feel for old master paintings in museums, it isn't some inherent quality of the art itself.
No, it's man-made.
Entirely man-made.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? It begs the question, who or what is doing this making, or as Berger calls it, this mystification? He points to two incredibly powerful forces at play: politics and commerce.
Right.
When art is mystified, its original meaning gets twisted or pushed aside or given a completely new spin that often serves someone else's agenda.
And here's where it gets really unsettling, I think. Think about how those in power might subtly reframe a painting's original message just to distract from social issues or, simply to solidify their own authority. It's a powerful tool for social control, really.
It absolutely is. And a fantastic, frankly tragic example from the book is the case of Frans Hals.
Ah, Hal.
The celebrated 17th century Dutch portrait master. Despite his fame, his face was even on the Dutch 10 guilder banknote. He tragically lived and died in poverty.
Can you imagine? In his final destitute years, he accepted a commission to paint 2 group portraits for an almshouse, depicting its administrators. So you have this brilliant, struggling artist painting the very people from whom he was receiving just the bare minimum to survive.
It's quite a scene, and what Berger illuminates is how Hals's subtle but, evident critique of these figures.
You can see it in the paintings.
Oh yeah, it's reflected in the unusually dark, gloomy tones and almost grim expressions in these paintings. They're so different from his usual vibrant style. But this critique was later deliberately overlooked by art historians.
How so?
Well, instead, they spun it. They emphasized purely technical aspects. They'd say the dark tone was a deliberate visual contrast, or the expressions were in-depth descriptions of personalities.
Completely missing the underlying tension.
Completely. And this, coupled with, political interference, basically mystified the artwork.
So the real social critique, the fact that charity and government subsidies were woefully inadequate for the poor, or that the social system itself was deeply unfair, that just got sidestepped.
Totally sidestepped.
Yeah.
So you end up looking at a painting and completely missing its actual, quite painful commentary.
Oh.
Exactly. And that deliberate misdirection isn't just political. It's deeply tied to how art becomes a commodity. Which brings us to Berger's next powerful insight: the role of commerce. Before cameras came along, an artwork's commercial value was primarily defined by its sheer rarity.
Right, the one unique object.
That one unique object became almost like a revered relic, not, in a religious sense, but in its singular, untouchable status.
You mentioned Leonardo da Vinci's version of the rocks in London's National Gallery. The source says its catalog entry runs to 14 pages.
14 pages.
But what's truly astonishing is that virtually none of it is about the painting's artistic meaning or its beauty.
No, it's all about who commissioned it, its estimated date, its ownership history, legal squabbles over it.
It's like a legal brief for a very expensive asset.
Precisely. The core goal of all those years of expert research wasn't to deepen our understanding of Leonardo's genius. Not really. It was to prove two very specific points: that the National Gallery's version was the genuine Leonardo, and that an almost identical painting in the Louvre was merely a copy.
Ah, authentication for value.
Exactly. This entire scholarly exercise serves primarily to establish and protect its commercial value, not its artistic message.
So that's one layer of how art becomes opaque. But then the invention of the camera, that threw a whole new wrench into the works, didn't it?
Oh, completely. Instant image reproduction.
Now, you might assume that making copies would diminish the original's mystery or maybe its commercial value.
You'd think so. Yet Berger argues often the opposite happens. The original becomes even more significant, more mystified, often because of pure market hype.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, consider Leonardo's charcoal drawing, Virgin and Child with St. Anne and St. John the Baptist, also owned by the National Gallery.
Right.
For centuries, it was primarily of interest only to art scholars. You know, a quiet piece of academic study. But then, an American collector offered £2.5 million for it.
Wow.
Suddenly, this unfinished drawing exploded onto the global stage. Now it's protected behind bulletproof glass.
So its fame, its aura, its mystification were almost entirely propelled by its astounding market value.
Pretty much. Not just its intrinsic artistic merit. It really forces you to question what we truly value, doesn't it?
It really does.
And, beyond the commercial impact, the camera also ushered in a fundamentally new way of seeing.
How so?
Before photography, European art, especially like landscape painting, largely relied on the concept of perspective. Everything was arranged around the central spectator.
As if the entire world was laid out specifically for your gaze.
Exactly. But the camera utterly shattered that. It can capture the world from countless arbitrary angles, completely eliminating that central privileged spectator position.
Right. Suddenly you could see things from perspectives you'd never physically experience. It challenges the very notion of a single correct view.
And this leads to another fascinating shift. The meaning of a painting is no longer fixed or permanent.
Because of reproductions.
Yeah, with camera reproductions, the exact same image can take on wildly different meanings depending on where and how it's presented. The book details a compelling experiment with Botticelli's Venus and Mars.
What do they do?
In this experiment, Venus's face was digitally isolated from the original painting and just presented as a standalone image.
Okay.
Detached from its original context, it became an entirely new portrait. It acquired meaning far removed from Botticelli's initial intent.
So it's not just a technical trick. It highlights how deeply technology can alter our perception and interpretation of classical art.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even making it fodder for modern advertising or pop culture. It changes how we see.
So when we connect all these threads, the commercial speculation, the political manipulation, the impact of mechanical reproduction, we see how art becomes increasingly inaccessible and maybe incomprehensible for the general public. It creates this vast and widening chasm.
And the data supports this, unfortunately. The source delves into social studies on art museum visitors across Europe. France is used as a prime example.
And the numbers are pretty stark, right?
They really are. Among people with no educational qualifications, only a tiny 0.15% had ever visited an art museum. 0.15%.
Wow. That's incredibly low.
It creeps up a bit with primary and secondary education, reaching about 10% for those with secondary education.
Okay, 10%. Now, you might expect that figure to skyrocket with higher education, right? More exposure, maybe more interest?
You'd think. But surprisingly, it barely budges. Only 12.5% of French people with further and higher education had visited art museums.
12.5%? That's not much higher at all.
No. The study's blunt conclusion is that for the majority of the public, works of art simply don't hold much interest. They just don't care that much.
Those numbers are certainly eye-opening. And if people do have impressions of art museums, what are they? The source mentions another survey.
Yeah, that one found that most people associated art museums with churches.
Churches. Interesting.
That's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? It suggests a strong feeling that art museums and the, mysterious objects displayed within them are set apart from secular everyday life.
Like places of reverence, perhaps, but not necessarily places of personal connection or accessible meaning.
Exactly. Distant. Holy, maybe, but distant.
So let's try and put this all together then. We've explored how artworks are often quite deliberately mystified by political and commercial interests, obscured. We saw how the camera, while a tool for widespread reproduction, has paradoxically intensified this mystification for commercial gain.
Right. The hype machine.
even while it opened up entirely new ways of seeing things.
Ultimately, this deliberate over-mystification, as Berger sees it, has driven a profound wedge between the general public and the art world. It makes it feel less like a shared human experience and more like an exclusive, often bewildering domain.
So thinking about Berger's arguments today, maybe a final thought for you, the listener. How might the deliberate mystification of images, whether it's in classical art or the news you consume or the advertising you see literally every day, how might that influence what you choose to believe and maybe what you choose to ignore in our utterly image-saturated world?
Yeah, it's a powerful thought to carry with you. What are you really seeing?